Hi, everyone. My name is Anika Verma, and I am the Chief Communication Officer at the Steamboat. For those of you who don't know, we interview various students who have showcased an interest in STEM and/or leadership through exceptional means. I am pleased to announce our next student, Haasini. Before we get started, I would like Haasini to introduce herself.
Hi, so my name is Haasini Yelugoti, and I'm currently a high school junior. I'm a very avid mental health advocate and also a suicide prevention advocate. So I host a podcast called Each Voice, which is focused on uplifting voices in psychology and mental health. I also founded a mental health club and advocacy group at my school. And so with that group, I've previously lobbied at the Capitol for mental health resources in high schools, as well as increased funding for 988, which is a mental health crisis line. And aside from advocacy, I'm really passionate about science, especially neuroscience. So I'm a part of my school's Science Olympiad and Science Bowl team. And I also like to play the violin. So yeah.
Oh, that's something we can definitely connect on because I play the violin too.
Oh,
That's a
that's great.
really fun instrument to play. All right, can you tell us a little bit more about your club, its name, how you started it?
Yeah, so uh my club is called the NAMI Mental Health Club. So it's partnered with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so how I started was I was really just like passionate about mental health advocacy in general. So before this, I had been in a mental health organization called Each Mind. So that kind of motivated me to take it a step further and actually, start a club at my school. So I reached out to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I reached out to the Tallahassee chapter, and that's how I, started the club. And so that's why it's also called NAMI. But the specific name that I have for like my part of the club, it's called Protea Teens. So Protea Teens is the name of the advocacy group that we have. So yeah, a protea represents like a protea is a flower that represents strength, courage, and resilience. So we wanted that to be our message when we were, advocating for mental health resources at our high schools. So yeah, that's kind of
That's such
how
a
it started.
really beautiful logo that you have. That's such a great name, and I really love it. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do at the club? Like, we got the goal and the purpose, but what actions you guys take to achieve those things?
Yeah, so for the mental health club in general, we host self-care meetings all the time. So we've had meetings where members did origami, like we do arts and crafts things to like help students de-stress. So origami, just today we actually made friendship bracelets together. And as for the Protea Teens group, like our advocacy group, we've been to the Capitol twice. So the first time we lobbied for increased funding for 988, which I mentioned earlier, and so that's a mental health crisis line. So we were kind of lobbying for a bill that was already written about um getting more funding for the line, so more people to like answer calls to the 988 number locally. And that bill was passed. So yeah, so we were really happy about that. And so the next year, we decided to advocate for something else. So we wanted to focus more on high school specifically. So we went and talked to several representatives and senators about, uh, we talked to them about mental health resources, and we specifically talked about wellness rooms in high schools. So, having like a quiet space for students to kind of relax and rest in. So yeah, we just kind of like pitched our idea to the legislators and talked to them about it. So yeah.
These are some really amazing ideas, and I'm so glad that the bill got passed. That's some amazing
Yeah.
work that you guys have been able to do. Earlier, you also mentioned about a podcast you started, so could you expand on that?
Yeah, so the podcast I started is called Each Voice. So it kind of has like its message like embedded in the name. But yeah, so every episode I talk with another person about their experiences with mental health or psychology. So currently I have a couple of episodes about, and they each focus on a different topic. So we have school and mental health, friendships and mental health, leadership and mental health, and spirituality and mental health. So for example, on spirituality and mental health, I interviewed a um an author of a spirituality book. And so she was kind of talking about, I don't even want to say interviewed because it wasn't really like an interview. It was more of like, I try to make it more of like a conversation with someone because I also share like my thoughts and my experiences as well. So in that episode, we talked about like how she went through her spiritual awakening and, you know, just how spirituality connects with mental health in general. So yeah, each episode I just try to talk about a new mental health topic or even a psychology related topic. And yeah, so basically it.
That sounds very exciting. Are there any like people that you're looking to interview in the future? Like, what kind of people do you usually interview for your podcast?
Yeah, so I am kind of open to interviewing anyone because mental health is such a broad topic. Like it doesn't have to be someone who is experiencing like mental illness or anything like that. It's literally everyone, right? So
Uh-huh.
yeah, so I am currently like I have like a couple of professors and people that I'm you know, talking to like professors to interview in the future. And also I have a couple of friends that are like mental health advocates. Like I have one person that's like going to be interviewed soon who is part of a mental health organization that they started. And and yeah, so just honestly like everyone, but for the more like educational and like informational episodes, I try to get like professors to talk about certain topics. So if we want to really get into like the neuroscience behind it or like the psychology, then that's when I would interview like a professor. So yeah.
Those are some really helpful tips. So, anybody who's looking to start like a mental health club like you did, or start working on a podcast, like what tips would you suggest them? How should they start? Like, what challenges might they face on their journey?
Yeah, so for the mental health podcast, I would really say that even if there's only a few people interested in your idea, it's still a good idea because I was lucky enough to have like a bunch of interest at my school, but I know that when I was like working with other groups that weren't just like part of that weren't the that wasn't the club at my school, um, it was kind of hard because nobody really like was interested in our idea or like really interested in contributing. So I think don't be discouraged. And if you really want to do something, reach out to people. Like honestly, that would be my number one thing. Like email people, text people, message them, um, ask them for advice. Like that is something that I started doing, and that was probably the most helpful thing in starting my club. If I hadn't emailed the National Alliance on Mental Illness, then they wouldn't have helped me start the club and provided me with resources for like activities that we're doing. And um and yeah, so DM people, there's a bunch of people out there who would love to give you advice and connect because I know that like starting a club is kind of very specific to specific schools. So yeah, and I would also be like, I would love to give advice, specific advice to anyone if they need it. So yeah, that. And as for the podcast, I would say, I think that you have to be really consistent with it. So I think I would encourage anyone to start it if they want to, because it truly helps you kind of get better at conversations and it also helps you build relationships with other people. But I think that if you truly want to keep up with it and like if you want to get far, then just be very consistent. Like have a schedule, um, be ahead of uploading episodes and and yeah, and even like for the podcast, reaching out to people applies because you're gonna have to reach out to people that you want to interview. So I think again, my number one advice would be literally don't be afraid to send that email. Don't be afraid to send that text. Do not hesitate. Because if they don't respond to you, so what? So what? Like, yeah.
I can totally agree with that. Sending an email and communicating is the best thing you can do. Worst case, they won't check it. Worst case, they won't respond. So, what is your like suggestion on like times when we should send emails and what to do if someone doesn't respond or something like that?
Yeah, so I think the time to send it really varies. Like I've sent emails like at like 1 a.m. Like I've just I'm kind of all over the place with my emails, but if it's like someone that I know is super busy, has a super packed schedule, I try to send it like when I think they'll be first opening their inbox, like at the beginning of the day. So like 7:30 for teachers, like that sort of thing. So like try to do early in the morning, so that it'll be like it'll fall like at the top of their inbox. But as for like um s- wait, what was the second part of the
Like
question?
how often, like if someone doesn't respond,
Oh
what
yeah,
do
yeah,
you
yeah.
usually do?
Yeah, yeah. So I think if someone doesn't respond, I sometimes send a follow-up email. So I'll be like, hey, I like, hey, just asking about this again, or hey, just following up to this email. And in other cases where it's like if I'm emailing like a professor or like someone who I know wouldn't really, you know, be like respond either way, then just I just move on. But yeah, if it's like important, if you really want something, then you should definitely just send a quick little reminder like, hey, just following up to this email, I'm not sure if you got it, something like that. Yeah.
All right, these are some very great tips. Could you tell us a little bit about your like journey of how you got into this? Like what inspired you to take action in the mental health field?
Yeah, so this kind of all started back when I was in quarantine. So I was in middle school, and I know that quarantine was like a very like everyone had very unique and very interesting experiences during that period of time. So for me, it was like I began talking a lot more to some of my friends about some of the things that they were going through. And I was also just very exposed to the news, the internet during that period of time because I had so much time I was spending alone. And I was like, yeah, online classes, all of that. I was just spending so much time online. So I became more exposed to the news, and just general like current events. So I kind of learned about this huge issue of like the rising suicide rates as well as just the prevalence of like mental illness in high schoolers. And so just watching like my friends go through uh things like related to that and kind of struggle with high school and struggle with mental health. I kind of became passionate to take action. So like I at first I just took like a small step. I just joined a mental health organization. And after that, I feel like even though I wasn't like it was just a small thing for me to like just join an organization, do some work here, get a couple of volunteer hours, and then I was gonna like, see where it went. But I genuinely like after I joined that organization, I feel like that increased my passion every single day that I was involved with mental health advocacy, and still to this day like my passion increases because I feel like every day I'm hearing more stories, every day I'm learning more about the issue,
Mhm.
I'm becoming more exposed to the issue. So that's it kind of like it was like a positive feedback loop where it kept increasing my passion. So that kept making me want to do more. So so yeah, that's kind of how it started.
You're a very extremely passionate individual. We can definitely tell that. Kind of backtracking a little bit, I have a question about the podcast. So, if someone is starting their podcast, like how do they gauge interest in it? How do they get listeners? And like, what's your experience with listeners? Like, how often do you think people listen to your podcast?
Yeah, so I think especially for a podcast, like it's really hard to get listeners, like consistent listeners to a podcast because as for like starting a club, it was different because you have members that you see every day, people that are interested in the activities. For a podcast, you're literally just recording your voice and just putting it in the public. And so you don't know who is going to listen to it, you don't know who is going to like it, who's going to want to hear what you have to say consistently. So it's you really have to deal with having a low amount of people listen to it. Um, or like a small number of people listen to it. It's not going to be like 100 listeners on the first episode. And at the same time, like it may be 100 episodes on the first episode, but then it might decrease over time. So about like keeping your audience's interest, you have to, I think, I use like Spotify. I upload my podcast onto Spotify, and a lot of people use like multiple platforms. But on Spotify, you can do like little polls where you ask the audience like questions about the episode. So sometimes I'll ask like, do you prefer longer or shorter episodes? Like, do you prefer this episode format versus the last one? And so I kind of use that to like gauge what they like, and then I incorporate that into my future episodes. And also, aside from that, I also promote my podcast on Instagram. So I try to make some of my posts pretty like engaging. So currently, like I'm making all of the like graphic designs for the Instagram, and I try to have like a consistent like brand or like theme. Um, and I think one thing that I'm also trying to utilize, and I think is like really helpful, is making like reels where it's engaging to the audience, and also just posting more on the stories, making polls, things like that, so people truly feel like they're part of the community. Yeah.
Those are some very helpful tips because I'm sure like many people do experience the fact that they don't have enough listeners, and these are really important to have your audience engaged and things like that. So I think these are some very important tips that you gave us. So moving a little away from mental health, could you tell us a little bit about your journey into like STEM? You talked about your interest in science and things along those lines.
Yeah, so I think growing up I was always a math kid. Like I did math competitions since I was like 8, 9, 8, something like that. I was really young, and I was competing in competitions like Math Kangaroo. We had a lot of like mini mew competitions where I live. So a lot of like just a lot of competitions in general. So I was competing all the time. And when I got to high school, I realized, yeah, okay, I kind of like science. So after I joined Science Olympiad, I was like, oh, I kind of really love this. And I became more passionate about science. And like I think like my math roots definitely still help me to this day. But I became again like I just found more interest in science. So it wasn't something that I was passionate about since I was a kid. Like most, like a lot of people that I know. Um, I think that like just being exposed to like certain courses at my high school, like I took AP biology, that really increased my interest in science. And also just being part of my school science Olympiad team, that also very much increased my passion for science. So yeah, that's kind of how I became passionate about science.
All right. So connecting mental health to STEM, many STEM fields are quite rigorous, have a lot of stress on students, like taking classes like AP Bio and things like that. There's a lot of workload on students, and it definitely affects their mental health. While maybe if you take comparatively easier classes, then it's a little lighter load. So how do you think, what are your suggestions for students taking rigorous classes, maybe looking to get into IVs? Like, what mental health tips do you have for them?
Yeah, so I completely understand what you're saying because I am in my junior year, so I'm like struggling. I'm in the IB program, so I'm taking like I'm taking 8 classes right now, and it's like all of them are IB or AP. So I'm very much struggling with that myself, but I think it's been so important to give yourself breaks. Like I think everyone will say this, give yourself breaks. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't expect yourself to work every second, every minute, every hour. Like give yourself time to actually rest. And resting looks different for everyone, obviously. But for me, I'll take a walk, spend time outside because, if I stay inside in my bed and like watch TV, that kind of makes me just feel like I haven't fully rested. And I think that if honestly, like sometimes I would say go for an easier class. If you're taking like 6 APs and you want to take another one versus like you're trying to decide whether or not to take another AP or take like a class that you're interested in but isn't an AP class, I would say maybe go for that class. Like you never know, you might really love that class instead of just taking another AP just to get the credit, right? So um, I definitely think that don't put too much pressure on yourself because high school is incredibly hard. Even if you want to get into like, a top college, um, I think that it's really not it's it's a good goal to have if you like if that's what you want. But I think don't stress yourself out too much in high school to the point where, it'll kind of destroy your happiness now. So,
Yeah, because you obviously don't want to burn yourself out before you even
exactly.
get to the harder stage of college because it's not going to get easier. So that's definitely very helpful. So can you tell us a little bit, like you mentioned like these STEM classes that you're taking and that you also want to go into the field of like neuroscience, right?
Mhm.
So what kind of classes are you taking for that? What sparked your interest in this field specifically?
Yeah, so um when I was in freshman year, I took AP biology and AP psych. And then in sophomore year, I took like a couple of other AP classes, but none of them were really like super interesting to me. I took AP Enviro and I really liked that one. But other than that, in this year though, I'm taking IB biology and IB psychology and IB chemistry. So all of those are very like those, I feel like that's like the perfect combination for neuroscience. So I think the reason I became passionate about neuroscience was because of my mental health journey. So, um, I I was like passionate about mental health, and then I became passionate about psychology, kind of like learning about mental health. And then I started like learning about the brain, because I became exposed more to people who were like neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, and I just started like researching more. And so that's kind of what sparked my interest in neuroscience. So this year I'm taking like all the courses to like match what I like because I was like, okay, I know junior is going to be hard. I might as well make it somewhat enjoyable and learn what I'm interested in because yeah. So yeah, that's yeah.
All right, you talk a lot about exposing yourself to different like things and how that helps you gain your interest. So for students who are not exposed to these clubs, these resources, like where would you tell them to start? What can they do to like be a part of their community more active and things like that?
Yeah, so I definitely know that I'm very lucky to have exposure to these courses and these teachers and these clubs at my school. So I think one thing that I was never exposed to was like mental health advocacy. Like if you have access to like the internet, then I feel like you can do so much because I n nobody like none of my friends, none of my family members ever were like super involved in advocacy, especially mental health. So that was something that I kind of like became passionate about myself. And I feel like I that's something that I truly kind of built up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I reached out to organizations, I joined organizations, um I founded, the club, the podcast. So I think that if you want to expose yourself to more things, because obviously you can't really decide to build yourself up unless you know
Yeah.
that you're really passionate about something. Um, maybe try watching like videos, TV shows, expose yourself to media, things like that, and that might help you gauge what interests you, and then use what you've learned to like um I don't know, like kind of decide. It doesn't work in every case because not everyone finds something that they really love. But if you do find something that you really love, then just again reach out to people and go for it.
All right. So you mentioned like, that we have to like find something that interests us. And so how did you like find the organizations that you're a part of? Like, I know you talked about going on the internet, but like many of us, when we start in like freshman year, let's say you come in and there's so many things you want to do, so many things you want to try. Like, I myself am a freshman and I don't know where to like start. I know I like the STEM field, but not sure how to narrow it down myself. So I was wondering, like, how did you narrow it down? And what clubs did you start out with, and where did you end with other clubs that you might do?
Yeah, so when I was a freshman, I was also extremely lost. So so no like you were not alone in that at all. I joined like a lot of clubs in freshman year. So I think people usually say to join, like they usually will tell people to join as many clubs as they can. And I think that you should just join whatever interests you. So don't obviously just don't just go around joining clubs for the sake of like joining clubs.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you may be interested in like speech and debate, then join that. And feel if you feel like you're interested in like volunteering, join that club. Go to all the interest meetings and see what interests you. I think that like you don't have to like even if you sign up for a club and you end up not liking it in the middle, you can definitely just quit. But yeah, this I think that if you really want to like learn more about what you're interested in, then you just try to kind of get a broad sense of what you can do in the future by joining all like a bunch of different clubs. Um and yeah, and honestly, like even if after freshman year you still don't know what you want to do, that's also fine. Like you will find your way. I know people um who knew what they wanted to do like before high school, and they have gotten so extremely far in that field just because they have been like, you know, researching and doing very specific things in that field, and they had like 4 years time to do it. But for me myself, like I didn't even know I liked neuroscience until like last summer. So it's very like it's really just everyone has their own time, and everyone's journey looks different. So yeah, just don't feel like you have to rush yourself to find what you love. Don't feel like you have to rush yourself because you have so much time. So yeah.
I know, like you mentioned, obviously the workload is much harder in like junior year, and it only like progressively is getting harder and harder. So, do you decrease the number of clubs that you do? How do you manage your time more? And like, I know you mentioned that you're in the Science Olympiad, and then you obviously are running your own club, which is a pretty heavy workload there itself. Do you do any other clubs?
Yeah, so I think that definitely like since freshman year, I've quit so many clubs. I do think that you should try to limit the amount that you do. I do agree with lessening your workload before if you know that your course load is going to get harder, try to tone down everything else that you're doing a little bit just so you can balance that and balance your sleep and your health because that is so important. Um, I think uh I would say that okay, well, I'll talk about like what clubs I'm in, I guess. So in freshman year, I was in like a bunch of clubs. I was in Key Club and Model UN and math club. Yeah, so math club and just a lot of different clubs in general. So I had a lot of things going on at that time, but at the same time, my workload wasn't as like bad. But in sophomore year, like after being in those clubs for like a year, I kind of realized like what I was more passionate about and what you know, I didn't really like. So naturally, it just kind of, um, I just kind of quit some clubs and I kind of figured out what I was interested in. So I think it kind of happens naturally, but if you have to like force yourself to lessen your workload, then I think you should definitely do it.
All right. Could you tell us like which clubs you chose finally at the end here now at junior year?
Yeah, so I'm in Science Olympiad, I do Science Bowl and my mental health club. So that's kind of where it is at right now. I'm also in National Honor Society, but um yes, yeah, that's kind
Yes.
of
So you definitely do a lot of volunteer work. We can tell you're extremely passionate and amazing member of your society. All right. Can you just tell us any last personal achievements, accomplishments that you have? It doesn't have to be in the STEM field specifically.
Yeah, so I think I like kind of talked about some of the things that I'm really, really proud of, like my mental health club, advocating at the Capitol, my mental health podcast. Some of the other things that I've done that I'm pretty proud of are uh I, I've medaled like in Science Olympiad at like national invitationals. So that's something that I'm pretty proud of. Uh and yeah, I also play violin in my all district. So that's just another accomplishment. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and that was so exciting, and I loved hearing from you. And I just want to thank Hasni for joining us this week on our series interview project. And if you're interested in getting interviewed by our team, be sure to check out the form shared in the description. We are always looking for interested students. We interview anyone between the ages of 14 and 22, but we'll always make exceptions for grad students that are doing amazing work. We hope to see you back here again on Monday for our next installment. Thank you, everyone.